Greetings. This week we're going to take a look at editing slides and organizing data on the slides. We'll also look at organizing data next week. And we're going to also look at creating a simple presentation as part of the lab. And so we're slowly inching up on what will look like a very cohesive and useful PowerPoint presentation, and continuing to hone your skills. If you haven't done so already, you should download the resource files for Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. They are each in separate zip files in Canvas. You should download them and unzip them and put them somewhere where you can find them on your computer. And then take an inventory of the files that you need based on what you see in this video. And here are the resource files for Chapter 4. For today, what I'm going to do is highlight some of the things that were covered in the reading, and if you follow along with the files that I utilize, then you should have a pretty good idea of what you or pretty good reinforcement of what you read in the reading. Again, download these files, and it's important that you do complete the reading. I can't produce a video that covers everything in the reading, or else it would be like hours long, and that may not be fun for you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the file create sections. So if you see that and you've downloaded and unzipped the Chapter 3 folder, double click on that file and open it up. Now for some of you, you might see a notice right here below the ribbon that says that the file is read only. That's because it was downloaded and unzipped. Just follow the instructions in that dialog, and then it will allow you to edit the file. If it's read only, the ribbon will be grayed out and you won't be able to edit the file. This is an example of a very well developed PowerPoint presentation, and as we can see right now, we're working in what's called the normal view, where here we see the slides in this navigation pane here on the left, and we can scroll up and down and take a look at the slides. And then of course we have the slides. Just for a quick review, what you're seeing now is my version of PowerPoint in Windows, and I'm using Windows 10. And it will look a little bit different than PowerPoint that you saw on the Mac in the previous modules. And I have in Windows some buttons that I frequently use that are added to the menu bar. For example, spell check, which I studied engineering, not spelling, and the animation pane. Now I develop a lot of e-learning, and so I spend a lot of my time working in PowerPoint and adding animations to the slides, and then importing the PowerPoint slides into e-learning software or recording videos. This section here is called the ribbon. And we can already see that the ribbon has some features that we didn't see in the previous videos. Some of the standard tabs like Home, Insert, Draw, Design, which we'll be talking about a lot today, and Review and Recording, which we haven't even covered. We'll talk about it briefly towards the end of class. And I have a new tab here, which I'll show you how to add that towards the end of class. And there's some add-ins as well, which you will probably never see or use in your iteration of PowerPoint. So I mentioned that this looks like a real example of a really well-developed PowerPoint presentation from the Community Service Committee on service projects. And there are some issues here. We talked in the last video about the crap principle. There are some definite issues with crap here. Nothing major, but there are some issues. We can get a really big macro scale view of this presentation by going to the slide sorter view here. And then here we see the thumbnails for each slide. And so if I zoom out just a tiny bit here, you can see that there are 12 slides, lots of text and narrative, and on slide number 3, a smart art diagram, which is really cool, and we'll take a look at that in the next module. But when you look at it, it's using kind of an older theme for PowerPoint, and right off the bat, there are some things that I would want to revise. But typically when you're developing your presentation, right, you're going to do your research, you're going to look at your message, who's your target audience, what's the goal audience, what's the goal of your presentation, etc. And then you're going to think about the design. So we're pretty much focusing on design and adding and removing content to our presentation. So I'm going to go back to the normal view. And then in the normal view, if I want to navigate between the slides, I can simply click here, right, and navigate to each of the slides. I can also use the arrow key on my keyboard. So if I use the down arrow, it goes to the next slide. If I use the up arrow, I can go to the previous slide. Or if I'm in the sorter view, I can jump around from these guys, and if I double click on the slide, it takes me back to the normal view. So I'll do that again, go to the slide sorter view, double click on the slide, and now I'm back in the normal view. Now, what I tend to do when I'm creating a presentation is I will just utilize the default theme and just add my content, and then later I dress it up and I fine-tune it. But there are some immediate concerns I have about the design of this presentation. So we'll look at that first, and then we're going to come back to entering text, adding and removing slides. Okay, and so one of the first things that I will notice here, particularly if we look at slide number 3, is that it's using a blue background with a gradient from light blue to dark blue. This is kind of a linear gradient, and the body text is blue, and the headlines or headings right here for this text box is in white. And one of the things is it's very difficult for us for a reader to contrast like colors. So if you think about it, if I'm looking at this presentation from, from the receiver's perspective, let's say I'm in the back of a room full of an audience with maybe 50 to 100 people, I may not be able to read this blue text with such a narrow font. And what's the font size? If I click on this text box, this is a text box that's built into the template, the PowerPoint template and theme by default. What's the font size? Where do I find that? Well, there's two ways to find it. One, when I select the text box, notice how it lights up the font group here on the Home tab. And what it's telling me is I'm using Central Gothic, which is the body text, and it's 20 point. And just a little tip is that generally you want to use a font which is about 24 point. Now we're not going to change that here because I see people do this a lot. They actually format the font size for every text box individually, one at a time. And you can do that, but it really, it makes you work a lot, right? So you might want to find a theme that has better contrast, the C and the CRAP acronym. Find a text that has better contrast and improves readability. Like this headline is good, but it's slightly misplaced. I don't like putting headlines or slide titles at the bottom of the slide, because we know that in North America we tend to read in a Z pattern. So we would want the header here because people will read it and see the slide title and know the topic, and then as you are working through the presentation and highlighting the bullet points, then they move in that Z pattern across the bullets and then down and out of the slide, waiting for you to advance the slide. So I'm going to be looking for a theme that moves the headline to the top and kind of adds some contrast to the body text. And I'm not going to do that manually. You're going to see a lot of people do that manually. And so what we're going to do is the reading, they talk a lot about adding and removing slides and applying and working with the body text in chapter 4. We're gonna kind of bounce around a little bit, and you guys are pretty smart group, so I think you'll be able to hang with me. So what I want to do first is, I don't particularly like this theme. It's an old-fashioned PowerPoint theme, and I'm looking for a different way to help with the CRAP principle, improving contrast and readability in slide overall. So when I present it, it's an effective presentation. So where would I go to do that? Well, as you're learning PowerPoint, you might hunt and peck around on the ribbon, because what I said is about the ribbon is it's very difficult to conceptualize it because it's contextual. Remember, if we resize this, see the buttons disappear, all kinds of strange things happen. And Microsoft decided to do that. I'm kind of partial, and I prefer the old standard toolbars that were built into PowerPoint, but that's just me. And so you might kind of click around and look for the features, right? So if we want to adjust the design of our presentation on a high level so that we don't have to do format each slide individually, you really want to work on the design tab. And so what does the design tab include? Well, it's very powerful because PowerPoint uses the idea of themes. And themes, each theme that's built into PowerPoint has some major features that are pretty much the foundation for all of design. And so themes include fonts and colors, right? In fact, we can click here under variants and it shows us includes fonts, colors, and effects, which apply to the animations, and background styles. So PowerPoint's look and feel is built around theming and templates, which we'll talk about later very briefly, because templates is kind of an advanced topic. And so you have the ability when you develop a presentation to quickly format it by selecting a theme or downloading a theme from office.com or Office 365. And within that theme, there are specific color schemes that you can utilize, or you can customize your own color scheme. You notice as I hover how the color schemes are applied to this theme because they're built into this theme. The fonts, as I hover, the fonts change and I can see. And one thing about this theme is it's using what's called a sans serif font. And sans serif fonts, if we zoom in, tend to, they're basically flat and blocky. They don't have the little curly cues on the letters like you would see in Times New Roman, for example. And typically sans serif, meaning without curly cues or serifs, is a font that you want to use for headlines, because sans serif fonts are attention getting. We want to slow the reader down and have them read a heading or a slide title, like this title, the title of this slide is Service Project Goals. And then with the body text, we want to highlight those goals, right? You can use a sans serif because it promotes readability, or a serif font here with the curly cues if you want, because it helps to promote readability, but that's completely up to you. So if we go back, I'm going to zoom out a little bit to get this thing sized. Or if I want, I can go ahead and just, as we know from review, I like to work at about 90%. Boing. And that kind of sizes the slide where I need it, particularly for my older eyes. So I want to use a different theme. So first of all, I'm going to select the theme type on a large scale. So there are lots of themes that are available. And if I hover over, I can see the different types of themes that are available to me. In fact, let me zoom out a little bit more. I'm going to go out to about 85 because then we can see, or maybe a little bit more if I can get it there. Let's about 78. And so now I'll hover over and we can see these different themes. Sometimes what's important when you're considering as a theme is what's the topic. You know, the committee here is doing a presentation. So we want a theme that conveys some authority, and we want good contrast and readability. So we want a theme that's going to look professional. See, like right now, we can see that we're currently using the slice theme. If we hover over here, this is called Wisp. But again, the font is pretty small, right? This is an example under Atlas of a font that uses a presentation that uses a serif font, fonts with the curly Q. And as I hover around and I look at these themes, the gallery looks like it might work for the presentation, but so does the Ion. And when I click on Ion, then it applies the theme to every slide. Now, let's go back to the sorter view and take a look. We can see that we saw some immediate changes considering the CRAP principle and how to enforce how people will read naturally. Like we can see that the slide titles are now at the top of the slides, and instead of us editing each slide individually, we were able to apply it immediately to all of them. However, if we go to slide 3 and double click to get a better look, we can see that it changed the color of this smart art, which we'll talk about later, to this kind of orange, and it's really a little bit funky, right? But remember, a theme includes colors, fonts, and style. So what we can do is we can hover over to see the different colors that we can utilize in the same theme and how that affects the presentation. And if we click and select Ion in this theme, then we can see, and that's really kind of psychedelic, right? It'll really get you going. Or we can move around and play around and see what we get. This is kind of soft, right? A little bit dark. This is darker, which might make it easier to read from the back of a room. And this one works as well too. This one looks really formal and clear, but it's kind of dry, right? So I'm going to go with this little blue too. Or how about blue? Right? And I like the fonts and everything, and I'm satisfied. If you didn't like this gradient, like this gradient isn't so cool, you can then customize the slide. And so right here, you'll see this in the reading. If I click Format Background, it opens up this sidebar that gives us some options that we can change the gradient fill and adjust it. We can make it a solid fill if we want, for example. We can continue with a gradient fill. We can add a picture. We can change the fill pattern and textures. There are all kinds of options, and it will apply them immediately, as you can see when you select them. Let's close this sidebar, and one of my favorite buttons is the undo, right? So I'm going to undo all those changes and go back to what we had, because I kind of like it. I think that it helps, and it makes it something that looks like it's easy to read, although this is kind of funky, right? Yeah, so that's something. Let's take a look at formatting that later.